Ankara on Friday. Israel is reportedly pressing the United States to demand 3 clear no's from Iran: no nuclear program, no ballistic missiles, and no support for Iran-backed proxy groups. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
The Israeli position was presented today to U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff ahead of his talks with Iran's top diplomat. Prime Minister Netanyahu, Mossad Chief David Barnea, and IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir all attended. The message from Jerusalem: 3 no's for Iran: no nuclear program, no ballistic missiles, and no support for Iran-backed proxy groups. Israeli officials also reportedly told the U.S. envoy that it's the Israeli view that the Iranian regime could be brought down through military strikes. Earlier in the Knesset, Prime Minister Netanyahu issued a sharp warning to Iran, vowing unbearable consequences for any attack on Israel, as diplomatic and military pressure around Tehran intensify ahead of critical talks later this week in Ankara. According to American officials, Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, are expected to meet Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, with Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt mediating. The Trump administration says the push for a deal is real, not a cover for military action, even as U.S. forces are in place for potential strikes on the Ayatollah's regime. The meeting would mark a rare face-to-face encounter between Washington and Tehran at a moment when both sides are edging close to direct confrontation. In recent days and weeks, President Trump has warned of military action if Iran refuses his demands, including ending its nuclear program, curbing its ballistic missile capabilities, and halting support for regional proxy militias. Iran has publicly rejected the demands, even as fears grow across the Middle East that diplomacy may fail and the crisis could tip into war.
And now to Gaza, where a new phase of post-war management is taking shape. The Rafah crossing has partially reopened. Palestinian medical evacuations have begun, and a technocratic governance model is being prepared, even as Israel warns Hamas may be working to maintain control behind the scenes. ILTV's India Naftali has the latest. India, what can you tell us?
Thank you, Lidar. This is a pivotal moment for phase 2 of the ceasefire. On one hand, a new administration that will govern the people of Gaza is starting to form. On the other hand, Israeli security assessments warn that Hamas is using this transition period to preserve its power. The question now is whether Gaza can actually move toward a new governance model, or whether Hamas will continue to control events from behind the scenes. The IDF recently presented Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with a 3-page document revealing how Hamas intends to rule and manage the Gaza Strip even after the new technocratic administration takes over. The document shows that Hamas is working from below to preserve its influence by integrating operatives into government ministries and security mechanisms, despite phase 2 of the ceasefire calling for the group's disarmament. Israeli assessments also indicate that Hamas has been strengthening itself militarily during the ceasefire. Israeli security officials say that without actual disarmament, Hamas would likely maintain effective control of Gaza, even if authority is formally transferred to a technocratic Palestinian committee. Meanwhile, on the civilian front, the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt has partially reopened for pedestrian movement only.
We welcome the reopening of the Rafah crossing. As we have said before, civilians must be allowed to leave and return voluntarily and safely, as international law requires.
The reopening allows limited daily movement, mostly for medical evacuees, and is being carried out in cooperation with Egypt and the European Union, with Israel maintaining full security oversight. The Palestinian Technocratic Committee, expected to take over day-to-day civil administration in Gaza, is set to enter the Strip next week through the Rafah crossing. The committee is supposed to begin replacing Hamas in managing daily life after the war. So while elements of a new civilian and administrative structure for Gaza are beginning to take shape, Israel's security warning is clear. Without disarmament, Hamas will continue to govern from the shadows, regardless of what new framework is put in place. Lidar?
Thank you, India, for the report. And even as a U.S.-backed peace plan has moved into phase 2, the war in Gaza is clearly continuing on the ground. The IDF says 4 Palestinian terror operatives were killed in northern Gaza after approaching Israeli troops near the ceasefire line. According to the army, the 4 were operating near the yellow line and moved toward reservists from the Alexandroni brigade in a way that posed an immediate threat. The IDF says the soldiers responded and eliminated the terrorists. At the same time, IDF operations are continuing in southern Gaza. Troops from the 7th Armored Brigade, operating under the Gaza Division, are active east of the Yellow Line, targeting terror infrastructure above and below ground. During recent searches, the IDF says forces found around 110 mortar bombs, several rockets, and additional weapons. According to the military, the arms were hidden inside blankets and humanitarian aid sacks marked as UNRWA assistance. The IDF stresses that its forces will continue to operate to remove any threat, underscoring that active combat continues despite diplomatic progress. And amid rapid developments in post-war Gaza, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is making moves to have the PA and the PLO at least appear to be going through political reform. The PA is also trying to strengthen its link to the new Palestinian Technocratic Committee now operating in Gaza. More from ILTV's Devo Klein.
Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has announced an unprecedented political step, calling for the first ever direct elections to the Palestinian National Council, the parliament of the PLO. According to the official PA news agency Wafa, the vote is set for November 1st. For the first time, PNC members will be elected by popular vote rather than appointed. Abbas said elections will be held wherever possible inside the Palestinian territories and abroad to maximize participation. The PNC, which elects the powerful PLO Executive Committee, has been largely dormant and last met in 2018. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are not represented. Attention is also turning to May, when Abbas's Fatah movement holds a key general conference that could shape the post-Abbas era. In a separate and apparently coordinated move, the Palestinian Technocratic Committee, set up to manage post-war Gaza, has quietly changed its public image, replacing its original logo with one nearly identical to that of the PA. The National Committee for the Administration of Gaza updated its social media with a new emblem featuring the PA's signature golden eagle, with the only change being the committee's acronym on the shield instead of the word Palestine. The move is seen as an attempt to link the committee to the PA despite Israeli efforts to keep the two separate and despite Prime Minister Netanyahu's opposition to any PA role in governing post-war Gaza, though PA representatives are already taking part in operations at the Rafah crossing.
And joining us now with more on the latest in the region, from the possibility of war with the Islamic Republic of Iran to phase 2 of the ceasefire in Gaza, is Edmund Fitton Brown, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So U.S. President Trump has announced that he wants to take the diplomatic route and negotiate with the Ayatollahs. So obvious question, isn't negotiating a deal simply helping the regime, helping to preserve this terror regime rather than helping the Iranian people to overthrow it?
Yeah, I think it would be. Of course, President Trump always does this. He'll always say that he's negotiating. He's looking for a deal. He's always campaigned on the basis that he doesn't favor war if it can be avoided. But we've also seen him say that he's negotiating and then suddenly get involved in military action. So there's an element of distracting the Iranians and keeping them guessing as to his true intentions. We don't know at the moment whether he sincerely wants to negotiate. In my view, he would only even consider pausing this military action if the Iranians were to offer some dramatic climb down from their previous positions.
Mm-hmm. Now, reports also indicate that countries like Qatar and Turkey are pushing to avoid this war, to avoid bringing down this regime, each for their own interests, of course. What do you make of this regional involvement and sort of their influence over the United States on the issue?
Well, I think Turkish and Qatari influence are both extremely unhelpful and also incredibly cynical in the sense that they clearly care nothing about the people of Iran, because the Islamic Republic has crossed a Rubicon in brutalizing its own people. And it really is just a matter of when it falls, not really whether. Now, the Turks and the Qataris are both saying that they would like the United States to give diplomacy more of a chance. And in a way, it's understandable that they would say that, because they're not the ones who are going to be involved militarily. They're not the ones taking any risks. So they appear to be peacemakers. And of course, that gets them some credit with the Islamic Republic. If the Islamic Republic survives in Iran, then Turkey and Qatar will be able to say to it, well, we did everything we could to keep you safe from American aggression. So it's pretty cynical in a way. Of course, it may be that these countries had some influence over the US decision not to attack during the height of the protests when Iran crossed President Trump's red lines. But I think now that the US has got the strike group in theatre, I think it's very unlikely that Turkey or Qatar can persuade the US to do anything other than what it plans to do.
And, it's not just in Iran. Let's transition now to Gaza, where, the Board of Peace is pushing for phase 2 of the ceasefire in talks. But on the ground, there's a very different reality. The IDF is continuously warning that Hamas is actually using these sort of diplomatic efforts to rearm, to solidify their power. I mean, it seems very clear that this is the case. So, what is the United States administration doing here? Why are they delaying sort of the inevitable, which is that some people say that the IDF will, at the end of the day, have to go in and disarm Hamas?
Well, that's a definite likely outcome. It's not a certainty, though. And for now, the Americans are very wedded to the Gaza peace plan. They're very wedded to the Board of Peace and to the idea of the International Stabilization Force. And so the question is, what would it take to make Hamas comply with phase 2 of the Gaza peace plan? And for that to happen, Turkey and Qatar and Egypt all need to keep Hamas under constant pressure and need to say to them, unless you comply with this, you will end up being disarmed and probably also decimated by the IDF. So it's still possible that that will happen, that the US will keep its attention on Hamas, and it will force Turkey and Qatar and Egypt to keep their attention on Hamas and to hold Hamas's feet to the fire. But you're absolutely right. If that doesn't happen, if people lose concentration, or if they don't have the political will to put political pressure on Doha and Ankara, then I think it's likely that the second phase of the peace plan will not move forward.
And, moving back to Iran, talks are scheduled between the United States and the Iranian regime in Turkey on Friday. I'm interested to hear your assessment of these talks, where you think this might lead, and what sort of red lines there are for Israel and for the United States.
Well, this comes back to your earlier question. This is the insincere role that the Turks are playing. And of course, Turkey shares Iran's objective, which is just to kick the can down the road. The Iranians are past masters of procrastination. They will enter endless negotiations. And of course, the purpose of those negotiations is to buy them time so that their enemies sort of lose interest or lose focus or, go and deal with something else. And they, of course, would be progressively clamping down and continuing to massacre their own people. And we should not forget that there are tens of thousands of people in Iran who are at imminent risk of being murdered by the state for their role in the demonstrations. Turkey doesn't care about that. They obviously want to try to preserve the Islamic Republic of Iran if they can. Now, I think that the United States understands that, and obviously Israel fully understands that. So I think that I think Trump's approach here is going to be effectively to say to the Iranians, if you make me an offer I can't refuse, that would be something along the lines of, complete abandonment of the nuclear program, a promise not enrich any further uranium, a promise not to use proxies against America's allies, then maybe America will listen and maybe there will be a pause. But I don't believe that the Iranians are able to make even that kind of offer. I think they're going to talk, it's going to be more in the nature of talks about talks and expressions of goodwill, and it won't be enough.
All right, so certainly interesting days ahead, both with regard to the Islamic Republic of Iran and, of course, in Gaza. Thank you so much for joining us today and for your insights.
You're welcome.
The story of the Jewish people has never been about standing still. It's a story of moving forward, of taking responsibility, of protecting what matters, no matter the challenge. That story is still being written today, not with swords, but with stewardship of the land, with the rule of law, and with the determination to secure Israel's future. And on the front lines of that mission stands Regavim. Regavim is a public movement dedicated to defending Israel's national lands and natural resources in the field, in the courts, and in the public square. Through research, on-the-ground action, and legal advocacy, Regavim works to uphold the rule of law and to ensure that Israel can grow, thrive, and remain rooted in its homeland.
And turning north, the IDF hit multiple Hezbollah targets amid repeated violations of the ceasefire understandings. The army says the past month saw the sharpest rise in IDF airstrikes since the start of the ceasefire in November of 2024. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz has the latest.
The IDF targeted and killed a Hezbollah terrorist in southwestern Lebanon near Ansariya, citing repeated violations of the ceasefire understandings. The army says it killed Ali al-Haqqani, a senior Hezbollah officer involved in rebuilding military infrastructure. Later, an additional strike targeted and killed a terrorist working to restore Hezbollah's military capabilities. The IDF said that Ali Dawood Amish, a division head in Hezbollah's engineering department, was killed while attempting to rehabilitate Iran-backed infrastructure and plan attacks against Israeli troops. The army reiterated that it will continue operations to remove any threat to Israel. The IDF also struck multiple Hezbollah weapons storage facilities in South Lebanon, warning that one was located in a civilian area, highlighting the group's use of Lebanese civilians as human shields. January saw a sharp rise in Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon, with 87 attacks, the highest since the ceasefire, targeting Hezbollah infrastructure, particularly north of the Litani River. In total, 21 terrorists were killed last month. That's more than double the number of strikes carried out in December. During January 2026, the strike rate averaged about 2 per day, indicating a high and ongoing level of operational activity. Since the ceasefire in Lebanon came into effect on November 27, 2024, a total of 810 airstrikes have been carried out. The ceasefire agreement requires Hezbollah to disarm, but Israel says Lebanon's efforts remain far from sufficient as the Iran-backed group continues to rearm. The IDF stresses that full Hezbollah disarmament is critical for Israel's security.
For more than 200 years, when Israel's most vulnerable needed help, Kol El Chabad was there. When families can't afford food, when seniors are alone, when children are struggling to survive, Kol El Chabad steps in with meals, essentials, and dignity. Right now, thousands of families across Israel are counting on that help. And you can make sure it reaches them. Your donation doesn't just give charity, it gives hope, it gives strength, it saves lives. Kol El Chabad, helping Israel one life at a time. Scan the QR code on your screen and give now.
And in other news, French authorities have issued arrest warrants for 2 Franco-Israeli activists on suspicion of complicity in genocide over allegations they attempted to block humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. According to a legal source, the warrants issued last July target Nili Kufernaouri of the Israel is Forever group and Rachel Twitu of the Tzav 9 movement. The two are accused of trying to stop aid trucks at the Nitzana and Kerem Shalom crossings between January and November 2024, and again in May 2025. The warrants require them to appear before a judge but do not call for their detention. French lawyers for the complainants say that this is the first time blocking aid has been examined as possible complicity in genocide. The activists deny the allegations, saying their protests were peaceful and aimed at preventing Hamas from seizing and profiting from aid. Israel strongly rejects all claims of genocide in Gaza. And Israel's Supreme Court has frozen the government's move to shut down Army radio, issuing a conditional order that shifts the burden onto the state to justify its decision. The court gave the government until March 15th to explain the closure, pushing past the government-planned and approved March 1st shutdown date. The justices said the focus will be on whether proper procedures and considerations were followed. The ruling immediately reignited calls from coalition ministers to defy the court. Communications Minister Shlomo Kari said the decision should be treated with a shrug, insisting the closure must go ahead on March 1st, and calling on ministers to boycott the station if it remains on air. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir accused the court of political interference, while other coalition lawmakers labeled the ruling illegitimate. The cabinet approved the closure in December, arguing Army radio's news coverage draws the IDF into politics. Petitioners against the closure of the iconic Army radio station say the move harms press freedom and was driven by political motives. And today, we once again have the pleasure of hearing from Yael Eckstein, president of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, as she brings us the latest highlights and inspiring updates from the fellowship's ongoing work.
Shalom from here in Israel. Here are two fellowship projects that you should know about this week. Number one, I want you to meet an incredible young Jewish woman named Anastasia. She's from Odessa in Ukraine. And after generations that her family dreamed of coming to Israel and making Aliyah, and after 8 straight days of bombing, she realized now is the time. And Anastasia turned to the fellowship, and the fellowship flew her and her children home to Israel. This is both in the vision of the prophets, and it's also saving lives. And number two, earlier this week, fellowship staff and volunteers went to see one of our soup kitchens in Jerusalem with our partners Meir Panim. And what we saw there was the growth of elderly Olim, new immigrants to Israel, who are standing in line waiting to get their one warm and dignified meal of the day. And this is one place in Jerusalem where we are feeding the hungry with dignity. Well, there you have it, friends. There are 2 fellowship projects out of hundreds that you now know about. Join me next week, same place, same time, for more updates on what's happening on the ground in Israel with the fellowship. Shalom.
Tonight, a U.S. attack on Iran hangs in the balance as U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff is in Jerusalem for talks with Israeli leaders ahead of last-chance deal-making efforts due to take place in Ankara on Friday. Israel is reportedly pressing the United States to demand 3 clear no's from Iran: no nuclear program, no ballistic missiles, and no support for Iran-backed proxy groups. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
The Israeli position was presented today to U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff ahead of his talks with Iran's top diplomat. Prime Minister Netanyahu, Mossad Chief David Barnea, and IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir all attended. The message from Jerusalem: 3 no's for Iran: no nuclear program, no ballistic missiles, and no support for Iran-backed proxy groups. Israeli officials also reportedly told the U.S. envoy that it's the Israeli view that the Iranian regime could be brought down through military strikes. Earlier in the Knesset, Prime Minister Netanyahu issued a sharp warning to Iran, vowing unbearable consequences for any attack on Israel, as diplomatic and military pressure around Tehran intensify ahead of critical talks later this week in Ankara. According to American officials, Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, are expected to meet Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, with Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt mediating. The Trump administration says the push for a deal is real, not a cover for military action, even as U.S. forces are in place for potential strikes on the Ayatollah's regime. The meeting would mark a rare face-to-face encounter between Washington and Tehran at a moment when both sides are edging close to direct confrontation. In recent days and weeks, President Trump has warned of military action if Iran refuses his demands, including ending its nuclear program, curbing its ballistic missile capabilities, and halting support for regional proxy militias. Iran has publicly rejected the demands, even as fears grow across the Middle East that diplomacy may fail and the crisis could tip into war.
And now to Gaza, where a new phase of post-war management is taking shape. The Rafah crossing has partially reopened. Palestinian medical evacuations have begun, and a technocratic governance model is being prepared, even as Israel warns Hamas may be working to maintain control behind the scenes. ILTV's India Naftali has the latest. India, what can you tell us?
Thank you, Lidar. This is a pivotal moment for phase 2 of the ceasefire. On one hand, a new administration that will govern the people of Gaza is starting to form. On the other hand, Israeli security assessments warn that Hamas is using this transition period to preserve its power.